the screams of wind tearing through Helena, Montana, that fateful spring day of 1881, would forever be etched in Tabitha Zimmerman's memory if she survived the chaos surrounding her. One moment, she had been gathering eggs from the henhouse behind her family's modest homestead. The next, the world had turned black as midnight, filled with a sound like 1,000 freight trains bearing down upon her. Tabitha had barely registered the funnel cloud on the horizon before it was too late. 22 years of life hadn't prepared her for the ferocity of nature's wrath, as the tornado descended upon the eastern edge of Helena with unexpected fury. The last thing she remembered was diving beneath the heavy workbench in the corner of the henhouse, as the structure lifted from its foundation and splintered around her. Now, buried beneath what felt like the weight of the entire Montana territory, Tabitha struggled to draw breath. A beam pressed across her back, pinning her to the ground. The space around her was pitch dark, and the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth from where she'd bitten her lip during the impact. Pain radiated from her left ankle, and she feared it might be broken. Worst of all, the stillness and silence that had replaced the tornado's roar made her wonder if anyone was left alive to find her. "Help!" she cried, her voice hoarse and weak. "Is anybody there? Please help me." The effort sent stabbing pain through her ribs, but Tabitha knew if she remained silent, she might never be found beneath the rubble of the destroyed henhouse and the debris that had collected from neighboring properties. Griffin Donovan rode hard across the rolling grasslands, his buckskin mare stretched out in a gallop beneath him. The 27-year-old cowboy had been out checking fence lines on the Double Circle Ranch, where he worked when he'd spotted the tornado touching down near Helena. Without hesitation, he'd turned his horse toward town, knowing his skills might be needed. The tornado had cut a vicious path through the eastern edge of Helena. As Griffin approached, he could see men already forming rescue parties, while women tended to the injured who had escaped the worst of the destruction. The foreman of the Double Circle, Elias Morton, spotted Griffin and waved him over. "Donovan, good you're here. We've got buildings down all over the east side. Reynolds Mercantile is hit bad, and there's a family homestead past the creek that took a direct hit." Griffin nodded grimly. "The Zimmermans." "That's the one," Elias confirmed. Old man Zimmerman and his son were found already alive, thank the Lord, but in rough shape. The mother was in town when it hit. But the daughter, Tabitha, Griffin supplied, surprised at how quickly her name came to his lips. He'd only exchanged words with her a handful of times when delivering cattle to the stockyard where her father worked as an auctioneer. Each time, he'd been struck by her quiet dignity and the intelligence that shone in her hazel eyes. "She's unaccounted for," Elias finished. "Some folks are already searching the main house, but nobody's checked the outbuildings yet." Without another word, Griffin spurred his mare toward the Zimmerman property. He'd barely exchanged more than pleasantries with Tabitha Zimmerman, yet the thought of her trapped or injured sent a cold fear through him unlike anything he'd experienced before. The scene at the Zimmerman homestead was one of devastation. The main house still stood, though half the roof had been torn away. Men swarmed around it like ants, removing debris and searching for the missing daughter. Griffin dismounted and surveyed the property, noting the barn had been reduced to kindling. His eyes tracked the likely path of the tornado, noticing a smaller structure or what remained of it near the edge of the property. The henhouse. Something pulled Griffin in that direction. Years of tracking cattle had taught him to trust his instincts. He began picking his way through the debris field, calling out periodically. "Hello, anybody out here? Miss Zimmerman?" Tabitha heard a voice faint but unmistakable calling through the layers of debris. Hope surged through her battered body. Here." She tried to shout, though it emerged as little more than a croak. "I'm here, under the henhouse." She gathered her strength and tried again, ignoring the pain that shot through her side with each attempted cry. "Help! Please, I'm trapped." Griffin paused, certain he'd heard something. He held his breath, straining to listen past the general commotion from the house and the distant calls of other rescuers. "Hello," he called again, moving closer to the pile of splintered wood and twisted metal that had once been the henhouse. And then he heard a faint woman's voice crying for help. His heart pounded as he scrambled toward the sound. "I hear you," he shouted. "Keep calling out, I'm coming for you." Griffin began clearing debris frantically, tossing aside planks and sheets of corrugated metal. His hands were soon bleeding from splinters and sharp edges, but he barely noticed. Someone was alive under there. Tabitha was alive, and nothing else mattered. "I'm Griffin Donovan from the Double Circle," he called as he worked. "Are you hurt? Can you move at all?" Tabitha nearly wept at the sound of a voice so close. "My ankle," she managed, "and something's across my back. I can't move." She recognized the name, the tall cowboy with the serious expression who occasionally brought cattle to her father's auctions. She'd always noticed him, standing a head taller than most men, with those intense green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Donovan, please hurry," she pleaded as dust rained down on her face. "I think this whole pile might shift." "I'm not leaving you, Miss Zimmerman," Griffin promised, his voice closer now as he systematically removed the debris. "Just hold on. I've almost got to you." Griffin worked like a man possessed, ignoring the shouts of other rescuers who had begun to join the effort. He had located the approximate spot where Tabitha's voice was coming from and was creating a tunnel through the wreckage. After what seemed like hours but was likely only minutes, he glimpsed something through the debris, a flash of blue fabric. "I see you," he called, renewed energy surging through his tired muscles. "I can see your dress. I'm almost there." With one final effort, he pushed aside a beam that had been partially blocking his progress. There, in a small pocket of space created by the fortuitous positioning of the workbench, lay Tabitha Zimmerman. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, her honey-colored hair matted with dust, but her eyes, those remarkable hazel eyes, were alert and fixed on his face. "You came," she whispered, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "Of course I did," Griffin replied, his voice unexpectedly gentle. He assessed the situation quickly. A heavy beam lay across her back, but the workbench had taken most of its weight. "I'm going to lift this beam. When I do, I need you to try to pull yourself toward me if you can. Ready?" Tabitha nodded, bracing herself. Griffin positioned himself and heaved upward on the beam. It moved slightly, and Tabitha used her arms to drag herself forward a few precious inches before the pain in her ribs made her gasp. "Again," she managed through gritted teeth. Griffin took a deep breath and lifted once more, straining with all his might. This time, the beam rose enough that Tabitha was able to pull herself almost completely free. With one final effort, Griffin raised the beam higher, reached down with his free hand, and pulled Tabitha clear, before dropping the heavy timber back into place. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, both breathing hard from exertion. Then Griffin gently gathered her into his arms. "I'm taking you out of here," he said, already turning to navigate the tunnel he'd created. "Hold on to me." Tabitha's arms encircled his neck, and she buried her face against his shoulder as he carefully made his way out of the rubble. The warmth of his body against hers felt like a lifeline pulling her back to safety, back to life itself. Despite the pain in her ankle and ribs, despite the terror she'd endured, in that moment, Tabitha felt something unexpected bloom in her chest, a feeling of security she'd never known before. As Griffin emerged from the debris with Tabitha in his arms, a cheer went up from the rescuers. Someone ran to fetch the doctor, while others rushed to clear a path toward the house. Through it all, Griffin held Tabitha steady, his eyes rarely leaving her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the commotion. Griffin's expression softened. "I heard you calling," he said simply. "I couldn't leave you there." Neither of them realized it in that moment of rescue. But the tornado that had nearly claimed Tabitha's life had also set in motion forces that would bring these two souls together in ways they could never have imagined. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but as Griffin carried Tabitha to safety, the first threads of their shared destiny were already being woven. Dr. Samuel Wilson, Helena's only physician, arrived quickly to tend to Tabitha. He confirmed her ankle was indeed broken and wrapped it tightly, then examined her ribs, which were badly bruised but not broken. Throughout the examination, Griffin remained nearby, helping where he could and keeping a watchful eye on Tabitha. "You're lucky, young lady, doctor," Wilson pronounced as he finished bandaging her various cuts and scrapes. "Could have been much worse. You'll need to stay off that ankle for at least 6 weeks." Mrs. Zimmerman, who had rushed home from town after the tornado, hovered anxiously at her daughter's side. "She can stay in the front bedroom," she said. "Though with half the roof gone, I'm not sure how we'll manage." Griffin, who had been conferring with some of the other men about temporary repairs to the house, stepped forward. "Mrs. Zimmerman, we've got enough lumber to patch the roof over 2 rooms, the kitchen, and 1 bedroom. It won't be pretty, but it'll keep the weather out until proper repairs can be made." "Bless you, Mr. Donovan," Mrs. Zimmerman said gratefully. "I don't know what we would have done without your help today." Griffin shrugged uncomfortably at the praise. "Just doing what anyone would do, madam." His eyes drifted to Tabitha, who was watching him from where she lay on a makeshift pallet. "I'll come by tomorrow to check on the repairs and see if there's anything else that needs doing." As the day wore on, the community of Helena rallied around those affected by the tornado. Neighbors brought food, supplies, and offers of shelter. Tabitha's father and brother, both injured but mobile, returned from the doctor's office in town to find the relief efforts well underway at their homestead. Through it all, Griffin worked tirelessly, organizing repair parties and ensuring the Zimmermans would have at least part of their home secure for the night. By the time darkness fell, he had helped install a temporary roof over the kitchen and Tabitha's bedroom, mended the damaged water pump, and even rounded up the few surviving chickens that had been scattered by the tornado. As he prepared to leave, Griffin made his way to Tabitha's room to say goodbye. He found her propped up in bed, her ankle elevated on a pillow, looking exhausted but markedly better than she had when he'd pulled her from the wreckage. "How are you feeling?" he asked, lingering in the doorway. "Like I've been kicked by a mule," Tabitha admitted with a small smile. "But I'm alive, thanks to you." Griffin shook his head. "You kept calling out, that's what saved you. Many people would have given up hope." "Not me," Tabitha said, a flash of determination crossing her features. "I've never been one to surrender easily." Something about her words resonated with Griffin. He'd always prided himself on his own resilience, having made his way alone since he was 16. In Tabitha, he recognized a kindred spirit, someone who faced adversity with quiet strength. "I admire that," he said simply. "I'll be back tomorrow to check on the repairs. Is there anything you need that I could bring from town?" Tabitha considered for a moment. "Some books, perhaps. I fear I'll go mad with boredom if I'm confined to bed for weeks." Griffin nodded. "Any preference?" "Anything with adventure," she replied. "I've had enough of real disasters for a lifetime. I'd prefer the fictional kind for now." This drew a rare smile from Griffin. "I'll see what I can find." As he turned to leave, Tabitha called after him. "Mr. Donovan Griffin, truly thank you. I don't think I would have survived if you hadn't found me when you did." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in crisis that neither quite understood yet. "Get some rest, Miss Zimmerman," Griffin said gently. "I'll see you tomorrow." As Griffin rode back to the Double Circle Ranch that night, his mind kept returning to Tabitha's face as he'd first seen it in that pocket of space beneath the debris, dirt streaked and frightened, yet still holding on to courage with both hands. Something about her had touched him deeply, in places he'd thought long closed off. For years, Griffin had kept to himself, focusing on his work and avoiding entanglements. After losing his parents to influenza when he was 16, and being forced to make his own way in the world, he'd learned that attachments only led to heartache. Yet today, hearing Tabitha's cries for help had awakened something in him he'd thought long dormant, a desire to protect, to care, to connect. The next morning, Griffin was up before dawn. He spoke with his foreman, explaining the situation at the Zimmerman homestead and requesting a few days to help with the rebuilding efforts. Elias, understanding the gravity of the situation and respecting Griffin's skills, agreed readily. "Take what time you need," the older man said. "We can manage here. Those folks need the help more than we need another hand on the fence lines right now." Before riding to the Zimmermans, Griffin stopped in Helena to pick up supplies. At the mercantile, he selected nails, roofing material, and other necessities for repairs. Then, remembering his promise to Tabitha, he made his way to the small bookshop on the corner of Main Street. The proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, greeted him warmly. "Mr. Donovan, I don't believe I've seen you in here before." Griffin removed his hat respectfully. "No, madam. I don't get much time for reading, but I'm looking for some books for Miss Zimmerman. She's laid up with injuries from the tornado." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. "Poor dear. I heard she was trapped for quite some time. You were the one who found her, weren't you?" News traveled fast in Helena. Griffin nodded uncomfortably. "Well then, let's find something to lift her spirits," Mrs. Henderson said briskly, moving among the shelves. "Tabitha has always favored adventure stories with a touch of romance. Let me see." She selected several volumes, explaining each one briefly to Griffin. He listened attentively, wanting to make sure he brought something Tabitha would truly enjoy. In the end, he purchased 4 books, including a new novel by Mark Twain and a collection of adventure stories set in far-off lands. When Griffin arrived at the Zimmerman homestead, he found the place already bustling with activity. Neighbors had come to help with repairs, and a small crew was working on rebuilding the barn. Mr. Zimmerman, his arm in a sling from injuries sustained during the tornado, was directing efforts from a chair in the yard. "Donovan," the older man called when he spotted Griffin. "Good to see you, son. Can't thank you enough for what you did yesterday." Griffin dismounted, nodding respectfully. "Just glad I could help, sir. How's your daughter today? Restless already?" Mr. Zimmerman chuckled. "Doctor says she needs to stay off that ankle, but you know Tabitha never been one to sit still for long. She's in the house with her mother." Griffin unloaded the supplies he'd brought, then, almost nervously, retrieved the package of books from his saddlebag. He made his way to the house, knocking on the door frame before entering. Mrs. Zimmerman was in the kitchen, preparing food for the workers. "Mr. Donovan, come in, come in. Tabitha's been asking after you." This simple statement sent an unexpected warmth through Griffin's chest. He followed Mrs. Zimmerman to Tabitha's room, where he found her sitting up in bed, her broken ankle propped on pillows. She was attempting to mend a torn shirt, but from her frustrated expression, it wasn't going well. She looked up as Griffin entered, and her face brightened visibly. Mr. Donovan, I was beginning to think you'd forgotten your promise. Never, Griffin replied, stepping into the room. He held out the package of books. As requested, adventures of the fictional variety. Tabitha set aside her mending and accepted the books eagerly, her fingers brushing against his in the process. The brief contact sent a jolt through Griffin that he hadn't expected and didn't quite understand. "You brought 4," Tabitha exclaimed, examining the titles with obvious delight. "Oh, I've been wanting to read this Twain book. How did you know?" Griffin smiled, pleased by her reaction. "The bookshop owner, Mrs. Henderson, helped me choose. She seemed to know your preferences." "She would," Tabitha laughed. "I'm probably her best customer. Thank you truly. This will make the confinement much more bearable." Mrs. Zimmerman, who had been watching this exchange with interest, cleared her throat. "Mr. Donovan, you must be hungry after your ride. Come have some coffee and biscuits before you start working." Griffin followed her back to the kitchen, where she poured him coffee and set a plate of fresh biscuits before him. As he ate, Mrs. Zimmerman busied herself with cooking, occasionally casting glances his way. "You know," she said casually, "Tabitha hasn't stopped talking about how you rescued her, like something out of one of my books," she said. Griffin felt his ears growing warm. "I just did what needed doing, madam." Mrs. Zimmerman smiled knowingly. "Of course. Still, it's not every day a girl gets rescued by a handsome cowboy." Before Griffin could respond to this embarrassing observation, Mr. Zimmerman entered the kitchen. "Donovan, when you're finished eating, we could use your help with the roof. That temporary patch you put on yesterday is holding, but we need to get started on a proper replacement." Grateful for the change of subject, Griffin quickly finished his coffee and followed Mr. Zimmerman outside. For the rest of the day, he threw himself into the work of rebuilding, helping to construct a new roof for the Zimmerman house and assisting with the foundation for the new barn. Throughout the day, he found his thoughts repeatedly turning to Tabitha, wondering if she was comfortable, if she was enjoying the books, if perhaps he should check on her. It was near sunset when Griffin finally took a break. Most of the other workers had gone home, promising to return the next day. As he washed up at the pump in the yard, Griffin made a decision. Before he left, he would check on Tabitha once more. He found her still reading, so engrossed in her book that she didn't notice his presence until he knocked gently on the door frame. She looked up, startled, then smiled. "You look like you've been working hard," she observed, noting his exhausted appearance. Griffin shrugged. "Your father's a good man to work alongside. We got a lot done today." "He speaks highly of you," Tabitha said. "Says you're the hardest worker he's ever met." Griffin wasn't sure how to respond to this praise, so he changed the subject. "How's the ankle feeling?" "Painful," Tabitha admitted. "But the book is a wonderful distraction. Thank you again." Griffin nodded, suddenly feeling awkward standing in her bedroom doorway. "I should be going. It's getting late." "Will you come back tomorrow?" The question came quickly, almost as if Tabitha hadn't meant to ask it. "Yes," Griffin replied without hesitation. "There's still plenty to be done." Tabitha smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "Good. I'll save my questions about Chapter 12 for when you return." Griffin raised an eyebrow. "Questions?" "Well, if you selected the books, you must have read them," Tabitha said teasingly. "Or did Mrs. Henderson do all the work?" Griffin laughed, a rare sound from the usually serious cowboy. "I confess I haven't read them. I've never been much of a reader." "Never?" Tabitha looked genuinely shocked. "But books are like doors to other worlds. How can you not read for pleasure?" Griffin shifted uncomfortably. "Never had much time for it, I suppose." Something in his tone must have conveyed more than his words because Tabitha's expression softened. "Well, perhaps that can change. Why don't you borrow this one when I'm finished? It's quite good." The offer surprised Griffin. No one had encouraged him to read for pleasure since his mother had died. The thought of sharing something that Tabitha clearly loved so much touched him unexpectedly. "Perhaps I will," he said finally. "Good night, Miss Zimmerman." "Tabitha," she corrected gently. "After pulling someone from beneath a collapsed building, I think you've earned the right to use their Christian name." Griffin smiled. "Good night, Tabitha. I'll see you tomorrow." "Good night, Griffin," she replied, his name sounding different somehow when she said it. As Griffin rode back to the ranch that night, he found himself looking forward to the next day in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Something about Tabitha Zimmerman had gotten under his skin, her courage, her spirit, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about books. For the first time since he could remember, Griffin felt a connection to another person that went beyond mere acquaintance or working relationship. It both excited and terrified him. Over the next 2 weeks, Griffin spent every day at the Zimmerman homestead. He worked alongside Mr. Zimmerman and the other volunteers, rebuilding what the tornado had destroyed. The new roof was completed, the barn rebuilt, and the fences repaired. Through it all, Griffin found himself increasingly drawn to Tabitha's room at the end of each day, where they would talk as the light faded. Sometimes they discussed the books she was reading, with Tabitha animatedly describing the adventures contained within their pages. Other times, they shared stories from their lives. Griffin learned that Tabitha had been born in Ohio, the family moving west when she was 14 in search of better opportunities. She told him about her dreams of someday seeing the ocean, of visiting the great cities in the East, of perhaps even writing stories of her own someday. In turn, Griffin gradually opened up about his own past, his childhood in Pennsylvania, losing his parents to influenza when he was 16, making his way west working cattle drives until he landed at the Double Circle 5 years ago. He spoke haltingly at first, unused to sharing personal details, but Tabitha's genuine interest encouraged him. "Didn't you have any other family who could take you in?" she asked one evening, distressed at the thought of him facing the world alone at such a young age. Griffin shook his head. "My father was an only child, and my mother's family disowned her when she married him. They thought she was marrying beneath her station." "That's terrible," Tabitha said, reaching out impulsively to touch his hand where it rested on the edge of her bed. "No one should have to face this world alone." The warmth of her fingers on his sent a jolt through Griffin. He looked down at their hands, then up at her face, illuminated by the soft glow of the oil lamp. The compassion in her eyes was almost his undoing. "I managed," he said gruffly, though he didn't withdraw his hand. "Made me stronger, I suppose." "Perhaps," Tabitha acknowledged. "But strength comes in many forms. Sometimes it takes more strength to let someone in than to keep everyone at arm's length." Her words struck Griffin like a physical blow. How had she seen so clearly what he had been doing all these years? Keeping people at a distance, afraid to form attachments that could be ripped away as suddenly as his parents had been taken from him. Before he could formulate a response, Mrs. Zimmerman called from the kitchen that supper was ready. Griffin withdrew his hand reluctantly and stood. "I should go," he said. "It's getting late and your family is waiting to eat." "You could join us," Tabitha suggested. "Mother always makes plenty and Father enjoys your company." Griffin hesitated, tempted by the invitation. The Zimmermans had indeed made him feel welcome these past 2 weeks, treating him almost like family. But something held him back, a fear of getting too comfortable, of letting himself need this warmth and acceptance. "Thank you, but I should get back to the ranch," he said finally. "The foreman's been generous letting me spend so much time here, but I have responsibilities there too." Disappointment flickered across Tabitha's face, but she nodded understandingly. "Of course. Will you come tomorrow?" "Yes," Griffin promised, already knowing he couldn't stay away even if he wanted to. "Tomorrow." As the days passed, Tabitha's ankle began to heal. The doctor visited weekly to check her progress, and by the third week after the tornado, he pronounced her ready to move about the house with crutches. Griffin had crafted the crutches himself, carefully measuring and shaping the wood to fit her height perfectly. The first time Tabitha ventured out of her bedroom on the crutches, Griffin hovered nearby, ready to catch her if she faltered. Her movements were awkward at first, but she quickly mastered the technique, her determination evident in the set of her jaw and the focused look in her eyes. "You're a natural," Griffin praised as she made her way around the kitchen table. Tabitha grinned triumphantly. "Freedom at last. You have no idea how maddening it's been, stuck in that bed day after day." Mrs. Zimmerman watched this exchange with a knowing smile. Over the past weeks, she had observed the growing connection between her daughter and the quiet cowboy. The way Griffin's eyes followed Tabitha when she wasn't looking, the way Tabitha's face lit up when he arrived each day, these things hadn't escaped a mother's notice. "Mr. Donovan," she said, "now that Tabitha's mobile again, perhaps you could accompany her outside for some fresh air tomorrow. The doctor said short excursions would be good for her, as long as she's careful with the crutches." Griffin nodded, trying not to appear too eager. "I'd be happy to, madam, if Tabitha would like that." "I would," Tabitha said quickly. "I've been dreaming of feeling the sun on my face for weeks now." The next day, Griffin arrived earlier than usual, bringing with him a surprise. While Tabitha was getting dressed for her outdoor excursion, he spoke quietly with Mr. Zimmerman in the yard. "I thought Miss Tabitha might enjoy seeing more of the property than she could manage on crutches," he explained, indicating the small wagon he had brought, lined with blankets and pillows. "With your permission, sir, I'd like to take her for a short ride around the homestead." Mr. Zimmerman studied the wagon, then looked at Griffin thoughtfully. "You've gone to a lot of trouble for my daughter, Donovan." Griffin shifted uncomfortably under the older man's scrutiny. "I just thought it might lift her spirits, sir." After a moment, Mr. Zimmerman nodded. "Tabitha's always had a mind of her own," he said. "Her mother and I have learned it's best to let her make her own choices. If she wants to go with you, you have my blessing as long as you're careful with that ankle of hers." "Yes, sir," Griffin promised. "I'll take every precaution." When Tabitha emerged from the house, carefully navigating the porch steps on her crutches, she stopped short at the sight of the wagon. Her eyes went from it to Griffin, who stood waiting with an uncharacteristically nervous expression. "What's this?" she asked, a smile starting to bloom on her face. "I thought you might like to see more than just the yard," Griffin explained. "If you're willing to trust my driving, that is." Tabitha's smile widened. "Mr. Donovan, I would trust your driving implicitly." She made her way toward the wagon, adding, "After all, anyone who can dig through a collapsed building to rescue a stranger has certainly earned a measure of trust." "You were hardly a stranger," Griffin said, helping her onto the seat and carefully arranging a blanket over her legs. He placed her crutches in the back of the wagon. "I'd seen you at the stockyard auctions." "Watching from afar hardly counts as an acquaintance," Tabitha pointed out as Griffin climbed up beside her and took the reins. Griffin clicked to the horse, and the wagon began to move slowly away from the house. "I noticed you," he admitted, keeping his eyes on the path ahead. "You always wore blue ribbons in your hair at the auctions." Tabitha looked at him in surprise. "You noticed my ribbons?" Griffin felt heat rising in his face. "I notice details. It's necessary in my line of work." "Of course," Tabitha said, though her tone suggested she didn't quite believe this explanation. "What other details did you notice about me, Mr. Donovan?" Griffin guided the wagon around a stand of cottonwoods before answering. I noticed you were kind to everyone, regardless of their station. I noticed you always had a book tucked in your pocket. I noticed you have a laugh that makes people stop what they're doing to look at you. He hadn't meant to say so much, and now he kept his gaze fixed firmly on the horizon, afraid to see her reaction. Beside him, Tabitha was silent for so long that he finally risked a glance in her direction. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, certainly, but something else too, something that made his heart beat faster. "And here I thought you never saw me at all," she said softly. "I saw you," Griffin replied, his voice equally quiet. "I just never thought I had any right to approach you." Tabitha's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Griffin sighed, struggling to put his feelings into words. "Your father is a respected businessman in Helena. Your family owns land, has standing in the community. I'm just a hired hand with nothing to my name but a horse and saddle." "Is that how you see yourself?" Tabitha asked, sounding genuinely perplexed. "Because that's not how others see you, Griffin. My father speaks of you with the highest regard. The men you work with at the Double Circle respect you. And she paused, and Griffin found himself holding his breath. "I see a man of extraordinary courage and kindness," Tabitha continued. "A man who risked his life to save mine without a moment's hesitation. A man who has worked tirelessly to help my family rebuild, asking nothing in return." Griffin felt something shift inside him, a lifetime of doubt and self-deprecation challenged by her words, by the sincerity in her voice. "I'm not used to thinking well of myself," he admitted. "When you grow up the way I did, always on the outside looking in, you learn to keep your expectations low." Tabitha reached out impulsively and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. "Then perhaps it's time you learn to see yourself through someone else's eyes." The wagon had reached a small rise overlooking the Zimmerman property. Griffin drew the horse to a halt, setting the brake. From this vantage point, they could see the newly repaired house and barn, the fields beyond, and the distant outline of Helena on the horizon. "It's beautiful," Tabitha breathed, taking in the vista. "I've lived here for years, but I've never seen it quite like this." "Sometimes we need distance to appreciate what's right in front of us," Griffin observed. Tabitha turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Yes," she agreed softly. "Sometimes we do." For a long moment they sat in silence, her hand still resting on his, both acutely aware of the contact, yet neither willing to break it. The spring air was filled with the scent of wildflowers and new grass, and a meadowlark trilled from a nearby fence post. Finally, reluctantly, Griffin stirred. "We should head back. I don't want to tire you on your first day out." Tabitha nodded, though she seemed as reluctant as he to end this moment. As Griffin released the brake and turned the wagon toward home, she spoke again. "Will you be staying in Helena long?" she asked, a note of uncertainty in her voice. "Now that the repairs to our property are nearly complete." Griffin hesitated before answering. The truth was, he had been putting off his return to full-time work at the Double Circle. Each day, he found another task that needed doing at the Zimmerman homestead, another reason to remain near Tabitha. "I'm not sure," he said honestly. "The foreman's been understanding, but I'll need to get back to my regular duties soon." "Of course," Tabitha said, looking down at her hands folded in her lap. "You've already done so much more than anyone could have expected." Griffin heard the disappointment in her voice and felt an answering pang in his own chest. The thought of not seeing Tabitha each day left him with a hollow feeling he couldn't quite explain or perhaps didn't want to acknowledge. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "I could still visit, on my days off." Tabitha looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "I would like that very much." As they approached the house, Griffin saw Mrs. Zimmerman watching from the porch, a basket of laundry in her arms. He helped Tabitha down from the wagon, supporting her weight as she found her balance on her good foot before handing her the crutches. "Thank you for the tour," Tabitha said, her eyes meeting his. "It was the perfect first outing." "My pleasure," Griffin replied, meaning it more deeply than she could know. That evening, as Griffin rode back to the Double Circle Ranch, his mind was full of contradictory thoughts. The growing feelings he had for Tabitha both exhilarated and terrified him. For so long, he had kept himself apart from others, focusing solely on work and survival. Opening himself to these emotions felt like stepping off a cliff, not knowing if he would fly or fall. Yet the memory of Tabitha's hand on his, of her words about seeing himself through her eyes, gave him a courage he hadn't known he possessed. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop living on the outside looking in. The next morning, Griffin had barely finished his breakfast when Elias Morton, the Double Circle foreman, approached him with a serious expression. "Got a telegram from the boss in Denver," Elias said without preamble. "He wants us to drive 500 head to Cheyenne, starting day after tomorrow." Griffin felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "Cheyenne? That's a 3-week drive at least," Elias nodded grimly. "Probably closer to a month given the time of year. Rivers will be high with the spring melt." He studied Griffin's face. "I need you on this drive, Donovan. You're my best trail hand and you know it." Griffin knew he couldn't refuse. This was his job, his livelihood. And yet, the thought of leaving Tabitha for a month or more filled him with a dread that surprised him with its intensity. "I'll be ready," he said finally, his voice flat. Elias clapped him on the shoulder. "Knew I could count on you. Take today and tomorrow to get your personal affairs in order. We ride at dawn the day after." Personal affairs. The phrase echoed in Griffin's mind as he saddled his horse. What personal affairs did a man like him have? A few possessions in the bunkhouse, some money saved in the bank in Helena. No family to notify, no property to tend, no one to say goodbye to except Tabitha. The realization that he would have to tell her he was leaving weighed heavily on Griffin as he rode toward the Zimmerman homestead. What would he say? How would she react? Would she even care that he would be gone for a month? He found Tabitha sitting on the porch, a book open in her lap. She looked up as he approached, her face brightening in a way that both warmed his heart and made what he had to say even more difficult. "Griffin, I didn't expect you so early today." She marked her place in the book and set it aside. Griffin dismounted, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "I needed to speak with you," he said, his voice more serious than he intended. Tabitha's smile faded, concern taking its place. "Is something wrong?" "No, not wrong exactly." Griffin took a deep breath. "I've been assigned to a cattle drive to Cheyenne. We leave day after tomorrow." "Cheyenne?" Tabitha echoed, her voice small. "But that's so far." "It's a month-long drive, maybe more," Griffin confirmed, watching her face carefully. "I can't refuse. It's my job." Tabitha was silent for a moment, absorbing this news. Then she nodded, composing herself visibly. "Of course you can't refuse, I understand." But the disappointment in her eyes said otherwise. Griffin stepped closer, climbing the first step of the porch so they were nearly at eye level. "Tabitha, I want you to know," he paused, struggling to find the right words. "These past weeks, getting to know you, it's been important to me." "And to me," Tabitha said softly. Griffin twisted his hat in his hands, uncharacteristically nervous. "I'd like to write to you while I'm gone, if that would be acceptable." Tabitha's eyes widened slightly. "You want to write to me?" "Yes," Griffin said firmly, gaining confidence. "And I'd like to call on you properly when I return. With your father's permission, of course." A slow smile spread across Tabitha's face, like the sun breaking through clouds. "I would like that very much, Griffin Donovan." Relief and joy surged through Griffin in equal measure. He reached out impulsively and took her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping her smaller ones. "I'll come back," he promised. "As soon as the drive is over." "I'll be waiting," Tabitha replied, her voice steady though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "And I'll write to you as well. You'll need to give me the route you'll be taking, so I know where to send my letters." They spent the next hour together on the porch, Griffin describing the trail from Helena to Cheyenne, the towns they would pass through where mail could be collected. Tabitha listened intently, asking questions and committing the details to memory. When it was time for Griffin to leave, they both felt the weight of the impending separation. He stood before her, reluctant to go yet knowing he had duties to fulfill at the ranch before the drive. "Tabitha," he said, his voice low, "there's something else I want to say before I go." She looked up at him expectantly, her hazel eyes catching the afternoon sunlight. "When I heard your voice that day, calling out from beneath the debris, I felt something I've never felt before, like my heart recognized you somehow, even though we'd barely spoken. I don't have a way with words like you do, but I need you to know that finding you changed something in me." Tabitha's breath caught in her throat. "Griffin, you don't have to say anything," he continued hurriedly. "I just needed you to know before I leave. I've spent my whole life keeping people at arm's length, but you somehow got past all my defenses without even trying." Tabitha rose from her chair, balancing carefully on her good foot. She reached out, placing her hand on his chest just over his heart. "Come back to me," she whispered. "That's all I ask." Griffin covered her hand with his own. "I will," he promised. "Nothing could keep me away." For a breathless moment they stood there, connected by touch and gaze and the unspoken feelings growing between them. Then, with gentle reverence, Griffin raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Until I return," he said softly. "Until then," Tabitha echoed, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Griffin reluctantly released her hand and stepped back. With a final nod, he turned, placed his hat firmly on his head and walked to his horse. As he mounted and rode away, he allowed himself one last look back. Tabitha stood on the porch, her hand raised in farewell, the spring sunlight turning her honey-colored hair to gold. The image burned itself into his memory, something to hold onto during the long weeks ahead. The morning of the cattle drive dawned clear and cool. Griffin, having spent his last day in Helena preparing for the journey, was ready before most of the other hands. He'd visited the Zimmerman homestead one final time the previous evening, saying his goodbyes to Tabitha and her family. Mr. Zimmerman had shaken his hand firmly, telling him he'd always be welcome at their home. Mrs. Zimmerman had surprised him with a package of home-baked biscuits for the trail. And Tabitha had given him something even more precious, a small leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts on the journey," she'd explained. "And perhaps when you return, you might share some of them with me." Now, as the double-circle hands moved the cattle out onto the trail, Griffin carried that journal in his saddlebag, along with the first letter he planned to send to Tabitha once they reached the town of Townsend, their first stopping point. The cattle drive was arduous work, as Griffin had known it would be. Long days in the saddle, sleeping on the ground at night, eating dust and enduring whatever weather the Montana sky decided to throw at them. Yet he found a new resilience within himself, fueled by thoughts of who awaited his return. In Townsend, Griffin posted his first letter to Tabitha, describing the journey thus far and confirming that they would be passing through Bozeman next, where he hoped to receive her reply. He found himself opening up on paper in ways he never had in person, sharing not just the events of the drive but his thoughts and feelings as well. To his delight, when they reached Bozeman a week later, a letter from Tabitha was waiting for him. He retreated to a quiet corner of the livery stable to read it, savoring each word as if it were her voice speaking directly to him. "Dear Griffin," she wrote, "the homestead seems strangely quiet without your daily visits. Father says it's because you were always busy with some project or another, but Mother and I know it's more than that. You brought a particular kind of energy with you, steady, reliable, yet somehow exciting too. I find myself looking up at the sound of hoofbeats, expecting to see you riding toward the house, only to be disappointed when it's someone else entirely." Her letter continued, telling him about her improving mobility. She had graduated from crutches to a walking stick, her father's expanding business at the stockyard, and the books she was currently reading. She mentioned that she had begun writing a story of her own, inspired, I must admit, by recent events in my life, and promised to let him read it when he returned. "I watch the horizon to the southeast each evening," her letter concluded, "knowing you're out there somewhere beneath the same stars. Be safe, Griffin. I'll be waiting. Yours, Tabitha." That single word, yours, filled Griffin with a warmth that sustained him through the difficult days that followed. As they pushed the herd south through Wyoming territory, facing spring storms, swollen rivers, and the occasional rustler, Griffin found himself changing. The solitary, self-contained man he had been was gradually giving way to someone new, someone who allowed himself to hope, to dream, to imagine a future beyond the next cattle drive or the next payday. In his journal, which he wrote in by firelight each night, Griffin explored these changes. He wrote about his growing feelings for Tabitha, his fears and hopes, and the kind of life he wanted to build. For the first time, he allowed himself to envision settling down, perhaps even having a family, dreams he had long ago dismissed as impossible for someone like him. The letters between Griffin and Tabitha continued throughout the drive. In Casper, Wyoming, he received 2 letters at once, having missed a postal stop due to a difficult river crossing. By the time they reached Cheyenne with the herd, Griffin had received 6 letters from Tabitha, each one deepening his connection to her despite the physical distance between them. The drive took 33 days in total, slightly longer than expected due to unexpected challenges along the way. When they finally delivered the cattle to the buyer in Cheyenne, Griffin felt a profound sense of accomplishment tinged with impatience. The job was done. Now he could return to Helena, to Tabitha. Elias surprised Griffin by approaching him the evening after they'd completed the sale. "Donovan, the boys and I are planning to stay in town for a few days, enjoy some civilization before we head back," the foreman said. "But I was thinking you might want to catch the northbound train tomorrow morning. Get you back to Helena a good 2 weeks faster than riding." Griffin stared at him in surprise. "The train? But what about my horse?" Elias chuckled. "Jenkins is heading back to his family in Billings. He can take your mount with him, meet you in Helena in a few weeks, unless you'd rather take the long ride home." "No," Griffin said quickly, then added with more dignity, "I mean, a train ticket would be much appreciated, Elias." The foreman's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Figured as much. There's a young lady waiting, if I'm not mistaken." Griffin felt heat rising in his face but didn't deny it. "Yes, there is." Elias clapped him on the shoulder. "Then consider the ticket a bonus for a job well done. Train leaves at 8 tomorrow morning." "Thank you," Griffin said sincerely. "I won't forget this." That night, Griffin wrote one final letter to Tabitha, telling her of his imminent return by train. He would reach Helena in just 3 days, he explained, far sooner than they had anticipated. He posted the letter before boarding the train the next morning, though he knew it would likely arrive only a day before he did. The journey by rail was a new experience for Griffin. He watched the landscape slide past the window, hills and plains and rivers flowing together in a panorama of the American West. As the miles fell away beneath the steel wheels of the train, his anticipation grew. What would Tabitha say when she saw him? How would it feel to be in her presence again after these weeks apart? They had connected deeply through their letters, sharing thoughts and feelings that might have taken months or years to express in person. Yet Griffin found himself nervous about the reunion. Would the connection they had built on paper translate to the reality of standing face to face? The train pulled into Helena Station on a sunny afternoon in late May. Griffin, carrying only a small valise with his personal belongings, stepped down onto the platform and took a deep breath. He was back, and Tabitha was somewhere in this town, perhaps not even aware yet that he had returned. His first instinct was to go directly to the Zimmerman homestead, but he restrained himself. He needed to clean up first to make himself presentable after the long journey. And there was something else he wanted to do before seeing Tabitha. Griffin made his way to the bank, where he withdrew a significant portion of his savings. Then he visited the jeweler's shop on Main Street, where he spent nearly an hour selecting a ring, a simple but elegant band with a small sapphire that reminded him of the blue ribbons Tabitha used to wear in her hair. He couldn't say exactly when he had made the decision to ask Tabitha to marry him. Perhaps it had been forming gradually throughout their correspondence, or maybe it had been in his heart since the moment he pulled her from beneath the debris of the tornado. All he knew was that he could no longer imagine his life without her in it. After securing a room at the hotel and making himself presentable, Griffin hired a buggy from the livery and set out for the Zimmerman homestead. The journey seemed both endless and all too brief, as anticipation and nervousness warred within him. As he approached the property, Griffin was struck by how different it looked from when he had left. The new barn was complete, the fences mended, and flowers bloomed in beds beside the house. Life had continued in his absence, healing the scars left by the tornado just as time had begun to heal the wounds in his own heart. Griffin saw Tabitha before she saw him. She was in the garden beside the house, kneeling among the plants, her back to the road. She wore a simple blue dress, her honey-colored hair caught up in a loose bun at the nape of her neck. Even from a distance, Griffin could see that she moved without any sign of her previous injury. He brought the buggy to a halt and stepped down, his heart pounding as if he'd run for miles. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the sight of her, alive and well and more beautiful than he remembered. "Tabitha," he called softly. She turned, startled, and then went perfectly still. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other across the yard. Then Tabitha was on her feet, running toward him with no trace of her former limp, her face alight with joy. "Griffin, you're back. But how the letter only arrived yesterday, you said 3 days." She stopped just short of reaching him, suddenly shy despite her initial rush of excitement. Griffin closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. "The train was faster than expected," he explained, drinking in the sight of her face, noting the faint freckles across her nose that had emerged with the spring sunshine. "Or perhaps I simply couldn't bear to be away from you any longer." Tabitha's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I've missed you so much," she admitted. "More than I thought possible." "And I you," Griffin replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day on the trail, every mile on that train, I was thinking of you, coming back to you." Tabitha squeezed his hands, her smile radiant. "Mother and Father will be so pleased you're back. They're in town for the day, but they should return by supper. Will you stay?" "If I'm invited," Griffin said, returning her smile. "But first, there's something I need to say to you." He led her to a nearby bench beneath the apple tree in the yard. As they sat, Griffin kept hold of her hands, drawing strength from their warmth and solidity. "Tabitha, these past weeks have changed me in ways I'm still coming to understand. For most of my life, I've been alone, convinced that was my lot. But then a tornado came, and I heard your voice calling out from beneath the rubble, and nothing has been the same since." Tabitha listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. "In my letters, I told you many things about myself, my past, my thoughts, my dreams. But there's one thing I couldn't properly express on paper." Griffin reached into his pocket and withdrew the small velvet box. "This is something I needed to say to you face to face." Tabitha's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. Her lips parted in surprise, but she remained silent, waiting. Griffin opened the box, revealing the sapphire ring nestled within. "Tabitha Zimmerman, I love you. I think I began falling in love with you the moment I pulled you from beneath that debris and saw the courage in your eyes. Every day since has only deepened that feeling. I know I'm just a cowboy with little to offer except my heart and my hands, but if you'll have me, I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." He took a deep breath, then asked simply, "Will you marry me?" Tears spilled freely down Tabitha's cheeks now, but her smile was luminous. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Griffin Donovan, I will marry you." Griffin's hand trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the sapphire catching the afternoon sunlight and throwing back blue sparks. "It reminded me of the ribbons you used to wear," he explained, watching her admire it. "It's beautiful," Tabitha said softly. Then, looking up at him with eyes full of love, she added, "But not nearly as beautiful as what it represents." Griffin reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In answer, Tabitha leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a first kiss that was tender and sweet, a promise of all that was to come. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling, their faces alight with joy and possibility. "I should warn you," Tabitha said, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "I've already started writing our story. The tornado, the rescue, the letters, all of it." Griffin laughed, feeling lighter than he had in years. "As long as you give it a happy ending." "The happiest," Tabitha promised, leaning in to kiss him once more. And so it was that a tornado, which had brought such destruction, also brought together two souls who might otherwise never have found each other. From the debris and chaos came a love that would weather all storms, built on a foundation of courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that sometimes the most unexpected circumstances can lead to the greatest joy. Griffin and Tabitha were married that autumn in the small church in Helena, surrounded by friends and family. Mr. Zimmerman proudly walked his daughter down the aisle to where Griffin waited, looking both nervous and more handsome than ever in his new suit. Mrs. Zimmerman wept happy tears throughout the ceremony, especially when the couple exchanged the vows they had written themselves. "I promise to hear you when you call," Griffin said, his voice steady as he slipped the wedding band onto Tabitha's finger to join her engagement ring. "Just as I heard you beneath the debris that day, I promise to always find you, no matter what storms may come." "And I promise to never lose faith," Tabitha replied, placing his ring on his finger. "To remember that even in the darkest moments, help is on the way. To love you with the same courage and determination that brought you to me that day." After the wedding, Griffin surprised Tabitha with his own wedding gift, the deed to a small piece of land not far from her parents' homestead. He had purchased it with his savings, and the bonus he'd received from the successful cattle drive. "It's not much yet," he told her as they stood on the property for the first time as husband and wife. "Just land and a promise, but we can build something here together." Tabitha, moved beyond words, simply held him close, her heart full of dreams for their future. They built their home that winter, Griffin working alongside the carpenters, insisting that certain features be included that were important to Tabitha: large windows to let in the light, bookshelves built into the walls of the parlor, a wide porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. Tabitha, meanwhile, filled the home with warmth and personal touches, creating a haven for them both. Griffin continued working at the Double Circle Ranch, but with a purpose beyond mere survival now. Every dollar he earned went toward building their life together, improving their property, purchasing livestock, planning for the future. Elias, recognizing Griffin's new stability and commitment, promoted him to assistant foreman, a position that brought greater responsibility but also more regular hours and better pay. Tabitha thrived in her role as wife and homemaker, but she also pursued her passion for writing. To her surprise and delight, a story she had written about a tornado and an unexpected rescue was published in a ladies' magazine in Denver. This was followed by more stories and eventually a serialized novel, bringing her a modest income of her own and the satisfaction of seeing her words in print. Their first child, a son they named James, after Griffin's father, arrived 2 years after their marriage. He had his mother's hazel eyes and his father's determined chin. Griffin, who had never imagined himself as a father, found a new dimension of love opening within him as he held his son for the first time. "He's perfect," he whispered to Tabitha, who watched from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "He is," she agreed. "And he'll grow up knowing how brave his father is." James was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Eleanor, named for Tabitha's grandmother. With her father's green eyes and her mother's honey-colored hair, she quickly wrapped both parents around her tiny fingers. As the years passed, Griffin and Tabitha weathered their share of challenges: drought seasons that threatened the ranch, illnesses that swept through the family, the everyday struggles of building a life on the frontier. But through it all, they faced each obstacle together, their bond only strengthening with time. On the 10th anniversary of the tornado that had brought them together, Griffin and Tabitha stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. The property had flourished under their care, with fruit trees now bearing in the orchard, cattle grazing in the pasture, and flowers blooming in Tabitha's carefully tended gardens. "Did you ever imagine this?" Tabitha asked, leaning against her husband's sturdy frame. "That day when you pulled me from the debris, did you ever think we would have all this?" Griffin's arm tightened around her waist as he gazed out at the life they had built. "No," he admitted honestly. "I never dared dream of such happiness. I was just grateful you were alive." Tabitha turned in his arms to face him. At 32, she was more beautiful to him than ever, with laugh lines beginning to form at the corners of her eyes and a confident grace that had only grown with the years. "I knew," she said softly. "Not right away, perhaps, but soon after. When you started coming every day to help rebuild, when we began talking in the evenings, I knew then that what I felt for you was different from anything I'd ever experienced before." Griffin brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch as tender as it had been on their wedding day. "You saw possibilities in me that I couldn't see in myself, and you gave me courage when I needed it most," Tabitha replied. "We saved each other, I think." From the yard came the sound of their children's laughter as James chased Eleanor around the oak tree. The sun was setting over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I wouldn't change a thing," Griffin said, his voice rich with contentment. Not even the tornado. Tabitha smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. Nor would I. For it brought me to you, or you to me, and that has made all the difference. As the light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, Griffin and Tabitha Donovan remained on their porch, arms entwined, watching over the home and family they had created together, a legacy of love that had begun in the midst of chaos, but had grown into something enduring and beautiful, a shelter strong enough to weather any storm that life might bring their way.